I've said to Ahmed, by the way, just my appreciation. I know we're not starting the meeting till 10 o'clock, but of the papers, which I think is starting to reflect the improvement in quite frankly, having an internal auditor and a risk director, which actually we haven't had for a while, which is tremendous. So we're in the development process, particularly around risk, and Ahmed, let you start the session, please. We've got till 10 o'clock, and probably, as you know, I'll help guide discussion. Thanks, mate. We're in your hands.
Thank you very much. So today we are going to cover 3 main points: committee role in terms of reference, report expectations, so what are the reports which will be regularly submitted to the committee, and what's the content of each report. Last point was about the committee name, if you need to update it or keep it as it is. Sorry. So the first part is we talk about the 3-line model. So this is a model presented by the Institute Internal Audit. This shows the relationship between the governance, management, and internal audit. So when we say 3 lines of, previously it was called 3 lines of defense. So the first line, which is people on the grounds, people who manage the risks. Second line, which will be mostly the officers, unit managers. The second line is the people who support the first line in doing their job. This will be the SLT, GM, unit managers, team leaders. And the third line, or the third line, would be the internal audit, which provide assurance that the first and second line is doing their job. All of this, the governance board and report to the governance body. So the community or the stakeholders entrust organization oversight to the governance body, which is the councillors, and which in turn delegates this resource and authority to the management to manage the operation and risks. The interaction between these 3 lines is how the organization will manage the risks in terms of the governance oversights the risks, delegates this to the management to manage it, and to make the assurance by the internal audit and reporting to the governance body. The 3 lines model, the document itself, we are printing it and we'll distribute it to you. The second, I want to distribute the terms of reference, so the current one. So in front of you is a copy of the current terms of reference. Normally, the terms of reference for a committee will cover 4 main points. The first one is the financial reporting, which will cover long-term plan, financial strategy, appropriateness of accounting policies, annual report, internal report, either quarterly or monthly, on financial and non-financial performance. Second point, risk management activities and internal controls. So setting the risk appetite, understanding the key risks area, effectiveness of internal controls, fraud risks, and procurement risks. The third, activities concerning the external audit, relationship with the auditors, understanding scope and engagement, review significant audit findings, monitor progress of recommendation, and finally, the internal audit, appointment and relationship with the internal audit, scope of work of the internal audit, response to internal audit recommendation. This will be the typical points covered by the committee. When you look at the current terms of reference, you'll find that some of this point is missing from this terms of reference. For example, there is no internal reporting, there is no risk appetite statement, fraud and procurement risk is not covered, external audit understanding, and also we reviewed on the open recommendation of external audit, but it's not included in terms of reference. The scope of work of the internal audit also, we report it to the committee, but it's not included in terms of reference. So this recommendation is therefore that this terms of reference should be updated to include more critical point for the committee to be covered. This one, another point that the committee does not have any authority to authorize anything, which they should have. For example, the internal audit plan, they should authorize it because this technically internal audit report to the audit and risk committee. So the internal audit work should be approved by the internal audit committee. Currently, this terms of reference does not cover that point. Any questions so far?
Ahmed, if I could just reflect. Can you just go back to that last slide? The last slide, the one that had the lines of... Just for those of you that have had a chance to read our papers, which are great, you go to page 129 of our open agenda papers. This actually is a critical part of how we want to manage risk, and I think this is what's really good about what Ahmed's trying to do. He's forcing us to be more disciplined and indeed with a fresh set of eyes look at a renewed way, not a renewed way, but actually an improved way of looking at our risk. So I think the critical thing that we're trying to do here is make certain that we've scrubbed up and polished our approach, not just as a council with risk management, but also indeed the committee as a whole. So consequently, I guess in lots of ways you're tackling it from two ways, Ahmed. One is what do we do on the ground? And in our papers you'll see things like the improvement program which you've given us previously and has been agreed by SLT. But equally, we're now trying to, in effect, as I would interpret it, Ahmed, fill in the gaps. And if you go back to this diagram, and I'm sure we'll come back to the 3 lines of defence, which is on the bottom line, but the top line is us in council. So indeed, this becomes critical. Are we doing the right thing, or rather do our terms of reference fit within that overall framework? Now, I'm jumping ahead of the agenda this morning because we actually got to approve this, but I'm struggling to think anybody might talk me down out of the framework. So I'm going to assume that basically when we get there, we're going to approve it. But I just think this is firstly worthwhile noting, if you will, Ahmed, because then we can come back to looking at the terms of reference, if that's okay. So it's a techo diagram, but I wonder, Janice, I'm looking your way really quickly. You're around the place, broader government experience probably of all of us here. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. And Ahmed, you're quite right that the current terms of reference don't cover off some of those appropriately. Yeah, totally makes sense.
Any other comments? So the critical thing here is
Can I just ask
oh,
a
yeah, go
question?
for it, Nigel.
So the governing body, isn't there a distinction between council and other governing bodies? Like, I would have thought the governing body was council and likes of audit and assurance and some of the other standing committees were advisors to that governing body. And I'm only saying that for a bit of discussion.
Aren't they council representatives delegated the work of council?
That's probably my point.
Yeah. But that means there's still a governing body?
I think it's fair, Nigel, that in some sense the risk committee tends to be advisory because we've got no executive powers. Sorry, we've got no policy role. Okay, so clearly we actually have an assurance role to provide assurance to other Nigel. We must work out Nigel B, whatever we say around this place. to the rest of council that actually we're comfortable, indeed, that actually the critical thing is actually that management internal audit, that those three lines of defence are actually operating. So, I mean, to go back to your point, we don't have any policy making or in effect executive management role. I mean, even when it comes to our papers and where, Nigel's to sign off the engagement letter with the external auditors, even though we manage the relationship, it's still only recommending that it be signed, not you will sign sort of type thing. So it is quite a unique position that we sit in. But you mentioned your other committees, and a lot would depend what you have delegated it. I suspect this diagram is made simply governing body, which includes all those aspects of whether it's full council, whether it's the committees, including us. I mean, there could be another line in there if that was of help, and I would be open to that. But otherwise, it's simply saying governing body, sort of plural. Down, is that what you're saying? I don't mean it that way, Nigel. I'm really open to your ideas. Oh, sharp eye, yeah. Page 129. Sorry, good point. Yeah, it was a boy look on my part. I didn't realise the qualifier, because that's got you're right, accountability. The diagram has got accountability to stakeholders for organisational oversight, whereas this is the one on page 129 I referred you to. We have inserted the line council, councillor and audit and risk committee.
Can just add at one point, we use this module in the risk management framework. So in the framework, it is aligned to our structure. That's why this is from the IAA as a standard, but the one in the framework have more details.
Okay, so I'm comfortable, Nigel, if in fact, I mean, we're partly doing, I mean, the workshop's helpful for our discussion in the formal council, but ultimately, if we had a better description there, I'd be really open to acknowledging the broader range of governing entities, if you will, that we have within the council. Because I mean, I would actually also argue, ultimately, we should be thinking about group risk. I don't want to overcomplicate the diagram, but the risks that TDHL carry are our risks. And one of the developing themes, certainly, I should be careful how I say this, but certainly in the areas that, those engagements I have, we are looking group risk rather than solely council risk. So that may be something to also think about. Ultimately, Archimed is actually. I hear your point. It's a good one, Nige. Is this complete, or is it? I know that. Sorry, I know that I should be careful. Is when we get to our agenda, is that diagram suiting us the best? So I take it's a good point. So we can work on that. Thank you. Oh, sorry. So look, I was doing a lot of yabbering away, wasn't I? So then the critical thing, and Janice, I think you've hinted at it, is that actually we could scrub up the terms of reference, correct? What any particular matter that strikes you as standing out there?
Well, I thought Archimed was right in terms of some of the things that under the functions that we do. Under the delegations, it's unusual in the roles, the boards I'm involved with, for the Audit and Risk Committee to have any general authority to make decisions. There might be one or two that are mentioned specifically, but generally there's no authority to make decisions on behalf of the council or the board, and you only make recommendations. But one or two terms of references do go, you can approve the internal audit plan, but they're prescribed as opposed to a general authority. So
before I state my views, I'd open up particularly to my other colleagues here. We've just sat round the table of the committee. I guess I chair for, whatever. How long has it been? Seems like a long time, does it, Scotty? I don't know. Does this look like the committee you want to have? Is what I'm trying to say. There's a sense to which, at the risk of making this bigger than Ben-Hur, I'm sort of throwing all the balls up in the air and saying, what would you want to see in here in terms of your thinking and experience of a risk committee? I mean, I think for ArcMed's case, we do have to keep it roughly in line with actually what is good risk committee practice. But I would like, you can put it in your words. We are doing the right stuff or we're not. This is your chance to perhaps have a crack. Michelle.
Just off the top of my head, I think it would be helpful to organise these functions into risk, audit, financial or other. And I guess the main thing, which is kind of clear but could be clearer, is what this committee's role is around those financials, because there is sometimes a feeling that audit and risk have an oversight of the financial performance and we don't, and so we need to make that very, very clear.
Great, we'll come back to that. Scotty, I'll go around the room. Scotty, anything that sits there that, jars with you or you think, gee, that's missing?
No, not at all, actually. In reading through it, what I like about it is it's the whole one-pager, high-level point of view works for me, in that it is governance as such. It's not management, it's not decision-making, and this helps to clarify that.
Yeah.
I like the look of it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nigel? You all good? Pete? Yeah. Brilliant. So let's just tackle that, Michelle. What do you think a risk committee does or doesn't do around finances? I think it's a really good discussion, by the way, because actually I do suspect if we were to survey the balance of your colleagues, they may well think that we're ticking off everything financial.
Yeah, so I think what they don't do is monitor financial performance and reviewing those regular financial updates. What they do is recommend the adoption of the annual report, which is not about whether it's a good financial performance or not. It's about whether it's met audit requirements, and it covers all the things that it needs to cover and paints a realistic picture of what's happened. I think it's that ongoing monitoring of financial performance that sometimes gets lost in translation.
And I think that's a valid point, because many that aren't on audit and risk committees think that you do review the financial performance, and most you only review it if it's become a risk and it's escalated up and the financials go straight to the governing body. I thought it was a great idea to group them together, because usually they are into the functions, internal audit, external audit, risk, etc. Recently, there have been increasing conversations around exactly being really precise about where sustainability reporting for annual reporting, etc., lies, and also health safety. So it's the performance reporting, etc., and being really clear about where that responsibility lies.
Yep, brilliant. So let me just check. I know I've got Andrea here. Who receives monthly or quarterly financial reports? Who at governance level, which in terms of, I lost my diagram, which in terms of our diagram, where did the financial reports go to that are monitoring financial performance? Just let's go the other way, let's just clear it out.
Currently it goes to commercial and strategy in the council, but it's going to change.
Ah, right, okay.
So each standing committee are going to get the financials relating to that standing committee.
Great.
So that they can deep dive, so environment or infrastructure, they can deep dive into those financials. And then when they go up to the council, you would have had the conversation on the detail, and you're looking at the consolidated level. I do wonder, though, whether audit and assurance, while they don't hold us to account on the performance, there's a little role there to keep an eye on, are things looking like they're imbalanced? Like, are the creditors blowing out, or are the debtors blowing out? Because, you know, you can have companies fail just on that point alone. So there's, while they don't do it, just once a quarter or once every 6 months, a look to say, does this look right? If you got what I'm trying to say?
Yep, no, I
Because
get your
again,
point.
it's another
yep,
line
yep.
of defence.
Yeah. Well, so again, I'm being a bit, I'm passing hospital passes all over the place here, but from your experience, Janice, what have you had with your risk committees around finance? You've mentioned financial risk, correct?
Yeah, it varies. The financial performance always goes to the governing body. Some the audit and risk committees look at it, but audit and risk committees usually meet much less frequently. So you're probably right, Nigel, it probably turns up to be quarterly or the interim and the annual accounts. So you can't rely on your audit and risk committee to give you oversight of your performance. So I'd say usually you rely on your governing body because that's the one that meets most regularly.
That would be my experience too, by the way. So, I mean, it's a long way coming back to your point, Michelle. I totally agree with you. But I think the importance of the discussion is that it's clear the risk committee, what it doesn't do is perform the role of a finance committee. And I think we've had for the discussion a couple of really good points. One, we only meet sort of I say 4+1. There's the annual report often as a separate meeting, but 4+1 times a year. Now that arguably fits generally with some monitoring because quarterly reporting isn't bad with the council, but we don't do that. So we need to be clear that we don't have that. The thing I'd like us to consider, and the second thing is because we have no policy ability, we don't make decisions, we talked about that before. A finance committee would, but we don't and we can't. So, it doesn't make sense for that to occur. The other thing that I'd like to look at when we come back to looking at an adopted LTP, which comes to your point, Nigel, I would be interested in considering what are our financial risks, because I think there is a role for the committee from a risk-based perspective to monitor risk. So it's things like looking at the papers, our debt portfolio, and where are we with our prudential limits. That would be a logical place to do. Or even higher level, what is our financial strategy and are our actions keeping within the context of the financial strategy, or are we running risks? But I would stress that's at a very high level. I can give you an example. Waipa, okay, I should be careful of talking about other colleagues from around the country, but a critical part of our financial strategy from the last LTP was land sales. I mean, it's a growth council, got good land to sell, and a critical part of our financial strategy to minimise the impact on ratepayers was that we had an aggressive sale plan as part of our financial strategy. For the last 3 years, we have, in a way that you're talking about debtors, Nigel, had a quarterly report, 6 monthly report actually in that case. How are we going against that land sales target? Why? Because it's a critical component of our financial strategy, and if we don't do it, it's placing us at risk. Now, we could argue that's financial performance as well, but I'm just trying to flavour the sorts of things that is actually risk rather than being a finance function.
So Bruce,
I'm going to say Nigel looks like he's about to break into song before, were you? Sorry about that, then we'll come back to you, Janice.
Here we go. It is a comment back to Michelle's point really is elected members, understanding their role, and especially if, there's ones that aren't as financially literate, thinking that audit and risk is a stopgap. And so there's some education, ongoing education that needs to be done in that regard. So, which is a risk in itself, if someone's not fully understanding their role.
Yeah. That's great. So, Janice?
I was just going to say, as simple as just a dashboard, which I imagine is what YPAR might
Yeah.
do, just going, these are
Yeah.
the key measures, and we're just going to monitor them whenever we meet, and it's a dashboard with outliers explained.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yes, some, actually, well, not always, but yes, they're good on dashboards on the whole. I mean, like often with the debt and the prudential limits, depends on your exposure, but I suspect if I've looked at the LTP correctly, we are increasing our exposure to debt. I don't know who we have internally, whether we have any external debt advisors at Timaru. I don't know, I want to say this, well, actually, the two main ones are PwC and Bancorp. And I'm used to a quarterly report from them on where we are relative to our prudential limits, you know, interest cover, fixed debt ratios, our debt to revenue ratios and those things that count. Where are we relative to those? Pardon?
Dashboard could be created.
Oh, absolutely,
internally for this
yeah.
year.
I think it just depends, all I'm reflecting there, Janice, is it's not unconventional within the public sector that actually our banking advice or our funding advisors would provide us with that information. But that's neither here, it's a matter of detail of how it's done. Okay, well that's really useful. So to come back to, if I can get it to the point that is helpful. Michelle, you started by saying it would be, sorry, Scotty, you want it left to have been on a page, and I would agree. Can we keep it on a page? Ahmed, you might have to lower the font a tad, but we want it on one page. Okay, that's number one. Number two, your good point, Michelle, that actually a level of grouping around key functions would be useful, and I've got risk, audit, and it probably is relevant to have financial, which might reflect that we're only looking at risk. It might even be good to have a negative, sometimes it's good to define things in a negative statement. We are not a finance committee, but we can check that one out. And I think the other one I would add as a fourth one is assurance. So that's where I'd like to bring in the external audit, the internal audit stuff that you quite rightly say that would give us then a reasonable line on what the committee is actually doing. And I think it's correct, Janice, just going back, because you commented the delegations look like they are reasonable, correct? Or would you like to see that changed?
I thought it was reasonable to say that you had no decision-making.
Yep.
But then there could be a specific delegation coming through to say for the internal
Oh,
audit.
to approve the internal audit charter and
the internal audit plan,
audit
perhaps.
plan. Yeah.
If the council didn't want to do that.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. And it would be normal for a risk committee to have that delegated ability to approve the internal audit charter and internal audit plan. Groovy. Any other comments? That's really helpful. Ahmed, I hope that's helpful for you, mate.
Okay, that's fine.
Good. Okay, we're in your hands.
Okay, next we'll talk about the reports. We have 9 reports that you usually report to the audit committee, and expectation for what the reports include. So the first report is issue register report. So this normally set as a public excluded item. So this shows legal cases or prospective legal cases. The report comes from different groups and units, so it's not centralized with any unit. That's all for this report. If you have any questions, anything. The next one is strategic risk. So this report will be a part of risk management quarterly update. So starting from this meeting, we will be reporting as risk management quarterly update. So the quarterly update will include the strategic risks, any change in the strategic risk in the previous quarter, the risk management activities during this quarter. Every 6 months, you will be presented with a high business risk, and once a year, all the risks. The restructure this part of the risk management improvement plan. The plan will be reported in this meeting. This format the new format is part of also the improvement plan. That's why we have, instead of focusing on the risk in itself as one item, we were reporting on risk management activity in general. The improvement plan will have long-term plans, so we're talking about 18 months plan, not 1 or 2 months, so we have more than one stage. We'll talk in more details in the report in the meeting.
Brendan, I wonder if I could just make a wee comment on that one, please. And it's really a combination of this and the issues register, which was the prior slide. I've got no trouble, by the way, with the issues register. One of the things I'm looking for, and I think it needs to, I mean, clearly it would start with strategic risk report, but it's the simple phrase, emerging risk. I think we can, it's really important that we maintain a focus on our strategic risks, because as we want to do when we get the LTP out, we are wanting to make certain we've aligned our strategic risks with what we want to achieve. I also think we have to have and monitor quarterly what's coming over the ridge at us, what's emerging. And I would like us to see another bullet point here. I mean, it's partly covered by changes in strategic risk, but I would be very keen that we are definite that we understand what is emerging risk.
Okay, so that's a good question. So
It was probably a statement, but I'll take any comments back from you.
So a quarter review of the strategic risk, and based on this review, if there are any new emerging risk will be discussed. If it is affecting our strategic risk, will be added and will be reported in the next committee meeting. They might be emerging risks, but might not have any effect on us, so it will not be escalated or reported because it doesn't have any effect.
I agree. Sorry, Janice.
Ahmed, I just read a strategic risk quarterly report for another organisation yesterday, and it was really interesting. They'd reviewed their strategic risks, and they provided a little line, just brief, outlining their thinking as to why risks might have changed or might not have changed. And it was really useful for me as a committee member to understand where they're thinking about, rather than just getting the report and going, we've increased this or we haven't changed that. It talked about the environment and gave you the thinking. So that was really helpful, just as a...
Yeah, that also will be included. So that's why it is a separate part, change in strategic risk. So we're not saying that this increase, decrease. No, you will have, table formats. So this is the risk, this is the change, and a statement why this is coming from. So it is reviews, there's something have changed in the environment, we have emerging issue or additional risk or something have changes. That's why we have changed this strategic risk, or either the descriptions, ratings, the treatment.
Yeah.
All this will be part of the second point, which is a change in the strategic risks.
Yeah, and that gives us comfort that
Yep.
that you're picking up
So-
those emerging risks, etc.
Yeah, look, and I mean, look, in this area, Janice, I look for the totality of what we do as a committee, and I think one of the things that I will be keen to see us develop, Ahmed, and I'm looking down at you, Nigel. We always look to have a session. Clearly, we've got a placeholder with you in PX. I often find that's when you take into account both the formal reporting, perhaps the more informal with the chief executive, or indeed you or the external auditor, there's a chance to understand what might be, I wouldn't even want to call it a risk at this stage, but things that we are monitoring that might be coming up which suddenly do impact our broader risk profile. I mean, I'll give you an example because it's well now truly dead. I remember Environment Southland. I'm no longer on Environment Southland, but the Taha Holdings issue of the alumina byproduct that was sitting in the Matara paper mills, okay, and we had a flood. And if the water had got in there, we would have had an environmental disaster. Now, it got raised by the chief executive probably long before we always knew it could be a flood, but at the first instance of that being identified. Now, it wasn't defined as a risk at the start. It was just good information flow, albeit, I can say in that situation, it very quickly did become a risk. But it's just, so it's almost an issue, isn't it? Because we've got one or two other matters on our issue list that sounds sort of semi-familiar, but actually it was also a question already to become part of our total risk profile and become part of our more formal monitoring process. So I just want to reflect, as a committee, we need to look at all the sources that give us that idea. Yeah, Janice.
When I was looking through the issues register, I was, and maybe it's more relevant there, but I was going, are some of those actually still issues with the passage of time and some of the things that have happened? I wondered how that's reviewed, and we had it up there, but I wondered how that's reviewed, and are they still issues? What is the actual issue or the risk? Just how do we monitor that?
Currently, each issue is the respective manager, so the one who reported is the one who follow up on it. And if there are any changes or update, he updated in the report or the register we have. So from my role, I don't interact with this issue unless it is have something to do with any of my assignments or any of the risks.
Well, that's why I want to reflect. I think it's important, Janice, that sorry, I hear your point about the reporting on the issues, but actually I think it's also important why we get the broader views of the organisation filtering in, because otherwise it's unfair to load that solely on you to get that broader sense. I think you're trying to get at the succinctness of the report.
Succinctness, but also with the passage of time, sometimes the importance or the issue itself isn't actually an issue. It just sort of dissipates or things have happened. And I wonder if once it's on there, they stay on there and they just get longer and longer and they stay on there forever. Are they actually still issues worthy of that consideration?
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I without again doing the business, I know this is probably a public workshop, but I think I've got some questions around exactly that point when we get to it. So to have a clear winnowing of what's there is actually making sense. Ahmed, I suggest I'm taking a lot of your time, although I'm finding this incredibly valuable, and I hope my colleagues are as well. So I'll let you perhaps just trundle on a wee bit here, if that's okay.
No, that's fine. So next we have the internal audit report. So the internal audit report will have two reports. One would be the status of the audit plan, what we have closed, what we have reported, what's still upcoming in the next few months. And the next report, which will be public excluded, this will contain the actual audit report assignments we have, and the update on the open recommendation for the internal audit.
Yeah, go for it, mate. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So I can answer this point. So there's two separate issues here. The first one internally, so the SLT will have report and alignment between strategic and business and operational risk. What will be reported to the committee is the high business risk. So this risk is rated as high.
There's an answer in our risk management framework. I'm trying to find it very quickly, which is really escalation. I mean, in short, I agree with you, by the way, Nigel. I wouldn't say automatically operational risks come to this committee, but if I think they're big operational risks, they do need to. Pardon? Yeah. What page have we got the escalation table on? Yeah. Got it. Yeah, page 137 is a good place for us to look at on the open agenda. That's got the sort of the escalation communication. This all comes back to risk appetite, doesn't it, Ahmed? We're going full circle here. I mean, this is getting awfully close, Nigel, to an idea that I've put in front of Ahmed, is that we need an assurance plan. I know this sounds like plans, policies and procedures, sort of coming out our ears, but there's a sense to which we look at our risk framework, and then we want to understand what are the sources of our that those risks are being managed. And by the way, at the risk of you and I betraying our old audit background, I totally agree with you around systems and process improvement, and we need to be aware of that. Sam brings us a brilliant short report now, thank you. I think Janice, which again is in our papers, over some of those core systems developments things which are really important, and I want to see us still seeing that actually we are developing our internal controls and systems and processes. But again, what I wanted to get to here on page 137 was the sense of where risks reside and what would give rise to escalation. So the question here would be, does this sit right with us? I don't know whether people have views on that. I mean, I'll give you an example, and it might be this is helpful, Nigel. High, you've got the risk owner talks to Ahmed, naturally, and to SLT, and monitor monthly. I was wondering why we don't see all high. Is this the next handout, is it, Ahmed? I'm wondering why we as a committee probably would want to see all high risks. I don't know. Well, that's not stated in my, I'm trying to match this with the risk management framework. Yeah. If that's the case, that's fine. But I mean, I'm just wanting to, obviously I've gone through this really in preparation. Any thoughts on that, Ahmed? I mean, I think what we're trying to say here is the diagram D, I mean, in conjunction with diagram C, the heat map, indicates firstly, quite rightly, where risks reside, but secondly, this is page 137 of the agenda, but also in a sense it's monitoring, and in some sense a sense of escalation or otherwise. And I mean, what I've noted in looking at this is that high risk in the risk management framework sits with SLT, but there's no sense of escalation or of even high risks being disclosed, whereas I must confess here, thank you, Janice, you're saying that they will come to the committee. I'm just trying to reconcile what I've got here in diagram D with what's sitting on the screen.
So in the diagrams, this was, if you have initial assessment of any risk and the residual rating, for example, if it is high, so this is the action you should do. So this is for initial assessment of risk, not ongoing assessment. So once you have a residual high risk, you should escalate it to me as a risk, an assurance manager, to the SLT as appropriate if it is, and every month this should be reviewed by the risk owner. So yes, this will be reported. If you go to the reporting table.
Yes, but I think you're also reflecting, if I've taken the slide correctly.
Sorry?
I think if I've picked up and trying to join this statement, the residual risk, and where it resides with this statement here, 6 monthly, the committee will see all those high risks.
So the committee will see if there any, what are the high risks every 6 months.
That's my point,
So,
yes. I have got that right, yeah.
If a manager have a high risk, let's say in January, so in June, this will be reported to the committee. Initially, he has this risk in January, so he have why it is high. This will be discussed every month, why it is still high, how you are managing it. This will be internal by the SOT and the GM. By June, if it is still high, this will be reported to the committee as
Yep.
part of making it transparent. If it is managed and the rating decrease from high to medium, so it will not be reported. So
Good.
this
I don't want
how-
to see any medium risks. You'll be
Sorry?
managing them, that's
Yeah,
fine.
So maybe it's just adding there that they'll be, high risks will be reported 6 monthly to the audit
Yeah,
committee.
thank you. I think that's a simple thing, is that something of the slide, either it's attached as a statement at the bottom of the diagram D, or indeed where it says monitor monthly and 6 monthly to the risk committee, whatever. I think it's a pretty easy fix. Okay, well, I think we need to keep moving. We've got 10 minutes. Sorry, Ahmed. Yes, well, I probably need to, for the public, start the meeting at 10, to be honest, but I would be keen to. Oh, look, sorry, I just want to check, because again, you've got a point here, Ahmed, about internal audit reports and open findings and recommendations reported in PX. For the want of, again, trying to do committee business, are you happy with that? I mean, I look at the two reports, for instance, in our meeting today, and they make sense that they're in PX. But is there a level of public accountability there, internal audit reports? Perhaps a summary should somewhere make their way to the public? I mean, that's a decision for you to make, Nigel, but I'm just wondering about that.
The rule of thumb should be that as much as possible should be in open. And there'd have to be a good reason why it's in PX. Because we want to be accountable to the community, and there would have to be quite.
Can they not be in PX as a matter of course, and then after the meeting determine whether they can be released?
Thank you. I mean, I think that's the solution I'm looking for, is I'm conscious that actually there's a risk that we put using that word too much, but it is a risk that we keep too much and just keep it buried is the wrong word, because it's appropriate, I think, to consider it, as you're saying, Janice, firstly in PX, and if I consider the two that we're dealing with today, I probably can handle that. But I'm just thinking, Nigel, rather than we just have the straight principle, we need to be aware and think through, even should our internal audit work be exposed to the sunlight of open at some point. Okay?
I don't know what your other local authority councils do, but University Council, at the end of each
Yes.
PX meeting, will say, is there any reason any of these can't be released?
Yep. Most effective actually was Auckland Council, where we would resolve at each resolution. What would happen? But it's another thing. Yes, Nigel? Okay. Peter.
I was just going to say, in terms of where we've come on that journey with the Ombudsman, about where we used to like to have information so that we could get all the information and formulate our ideas without making any decisions with some discussion, and now we're not allowed to do that. And it has to be virtually nothing goes into PX. Is this not the same principle, based on the fact that unless it fits with one of those criteria under Lagoima, and that threshold then allows it to be put into PX, then it can't? I don't know if that's. I'm just
Well, I think. Look, I think all I'm trying to do here, and I'm not having a crack at Ahmed. I'm just wanting to. I mean, it's important that Ahmed's raised where he wants to raise them, but I don't think that automatically means, in this sort of post-meeting environment, there shouldn't be consideration as to whether it could be released. For exactly your point that you're making, Peter, and you're making, Nigel, we should be trying to have these things out in the open to the extent that we can. Okay, let's keep that going, Ahmed. We understand where that's going. Yep.
The next report is external audit open findings. So this mainly come from external audit, like Audit New Zealand, most of them coming from Audit New Zealand. Audit New Zealand submits their management letter, and based on this findings and update of the management letter, we update the reports. They are the only one responsible for closing any of these items, so I cannot say that it's closed. Neither the management, Audit New Zealand are the only one, and we know if it is closed or not based on the management letter they submit every year. The next one, we have the compliance. So the compliance report, previously we have the comply with software, so we have a survey tool. We ran a survey last year in August 23. The results of this survey and follow-up on part 3 or 0 compliance will be reported every quarter. Any updates? Currently, we are assessing the processes and tools for the compliance. So if this tool is really serving our needs or not, and this will be assessed during the coming 2 or 3 weeks. Then by next meeting, we'll have a new proposal, what will be the reporting for this specific area. The next report is a business improvement update. So this report goes to the Commercial and Strategy Committee, in addition to Audit and Risk Committee. It comes to this committee because previously it was under Risk and Assurance Unit, but currently it is moved to the community group and is no longer managed by the Risk and Assurance Unit. So we propose that this report be kept with the Commercial and Strategy Committee. It is operational report in nature about the systems and tools, mainly IT tools that the council would like to use. It is not linked to any of internal audit or external audit findings. It is not directly linked to any of the risks. So there's a question mark about this report coming to this committee.
Janice, you've had a lot of input to this. You may have a comment you want to make?
I agree that it probably shouldn't be here. It's operational, unless it was a major total system revamp and it created a significant risk. As it is, I don't see that it's relevant to this committee as long as it's going somewhere else.
Okay, my counter view is actually I like the way no, it actually goes back to the point that Nigel was making about I'm looking for assurance that we're doing things that are right. So I must confess, in light of the paper, which I suspect, Janice, you've had a very helpful hand in or talking with Sam about actually its abbreviation. Coming in a sense for information only is really important because that gives me assurance that we are actually upgrading our systems and processes. Because I'm conscious one of the assurance dimensions that I'm looking for in terms of us managing risk is that we are monitoring and improving our systems. And this gives me a sense. I mean, after all, what is it? That's got ESCA on it. I think I've got, if I'm correct. And ESCA has been key to our
I was just
external
going to say
audit
for the
finding.
audit
It's
findings.
been external. It's been important to a whole bunch of things, and I want to know where it's at.
Yeah. So the report in and of itself, I don't think is relevant here, but it's the impact on the audit findings.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that through before you said
Yeah.
it, so yeah.
Okay, rightio. So we'll keep it, well, at the high level, at the very least, until we find it's redundant, but I'll see where it goes. Nigel, you've got something to say?
I think it's important that it's, I'm happy either way, but if it's going to stay here, then it still needs to be presented to Peru Community Development, because that's been quite good as far as other elected members that aren't seeing this online and what have you. So I think that's of value. Yeah.
Well, look, I won't be doctrinaire on my insistence that comes here, and I agree with you that it is operational in nature. It needs to get to your obvious strategy committee. I'm just thinking, and we can think through it. ArcMed can for us. you know, again, perhaps going back to Janice's point, if it's a significant one, and ESCA clearly is, what's the best way for us to understand it? Is it sufficient that we just see its progress through the response to the external audit items, for instance, which is where it raises itself a number of times? I'm open to that argument.
You want to proceed? Do we have